I'd just like to state that in the spirit of reconciliation, the Judgment Index acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. I wish to pay respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So today's webinar seeks to delve into strategies for fostering resilience, enhancing engagement, and driving productivity within your teams. But feel free to ask your questions as we go through the content by adding them into the chat. So what is the Judgment Index? So the Judgment Index is a unique and powerful judgment instrument, or in other words, it's a values-based assessment tool. So the Judgment Index is based on the premise that the success of an individual and the organisations they work for greatly depend on the strength of judgment to numerous everyday decisions. These decisions can relate to everyday tactical or workplace role decisions through to higher level organisational strategic decisions. In all cases, it's actually good judgment in decision making that's going to be the key to successful outcomes. Why are we touching on the Judgment Index in relation to resiliency? Now, we'll break that down a little bit further, but I wanted to give you a bit of a background as to where the insights come from, which is why I'm talking about how the Judgment Index in what you're seeing on your screen really is about real quantifiable insights into a person's judgment and decision-making capabilities. In fact, research studies have actually labelled the JI as one of the most scientific, mathematical and logically based assessment tools in the world. It has actually been developed and refined for over 40 years, and there are multiple validity studies. And if you actually needed further confirmation of validity, there are numerous bodies, associations and institutes that recognise the tool and also provide credit towards an individual's professional development. So a little bit more about the background in terms of how it was developed, because not many people are actually familiar with Dr. Robert Hartman. He was a judge, logician, philosopher, and his legacy is the field of science known as axiology, or the study of values. I actually like to simplify this theory by describing it in terms of three lenses we use to view the world, or in other words, how we value something. So let's take this coffee cup. Extrinsically, it is just a coffee cup. It has a function, a task, and the work that it does is give me an opportunity to drink coffee. But intrinsically, my girlfriend gave me this cup for Christmas, so I value it relationally and intrinsically for that reason. And the third aspect is that even though it's stained and, a bit chipped, the reality is that from a systemic viewpoint, it still functions. And I am a firm believer in living simply and not buying something new just for the purposes of having something bright and shiny. So they're the three ways that we view the world: extrinsically, intrinsically, and systemically. And Dr. Steve Byram, who's the actual founder of the Judgment Index, he studied under Dr. Robert Hartman, and it was actually his vision to modernise the Hartman value profile and continue to spread the word about values measurement as opposed to behaviours or personality profiling. So let's also get clear on what it's not. It's not a measure of intelligence, psychological inventory, a personality test, or easy to game. There are numerous psychometric tests, and a lot of people are familiar with, for example, DISC. So this is personality. DISC is personality or psychologically based. It's self-reporting, easy to work with. So the reality is that particular type of assessment is a good intro tool, and the Judgment Index have often been requested to actually work with organisations and further the conversation on information like that. So I just wanted to point out that it doesn't have to be a matter of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. If you're already using personality-based tests, the Judgment Index can actually and has been proven to be useful in combination with such other assessments. With the Judgment Index, though, it is only one assessment, but there's a large number of reports that have been built with industry benchmarking and client-specific requirements in mind. For recruitment, throughout the process, including pre-screening and for more in-depth interview analysis, also development and ongoing learning and development programs, recognising that the onboarding and employee lifecycle is continuous and ever evolving. There are numerous reports that can provide insights to direct resources within your organisations more appropriately. And leadership programs for not only succession planning, but strategic and targeted growth of individuals, as well as the enhancement of teams. So what does it measure? There's actually over 60 plus areas that are obtained and available through the Judgment Index assessment. They talk in terms of our work side, what we do, our self side, who we are, and importantly, balance. The reality is that I've used this assessment on multiple occasions to talk to a number of leaders about how they might be strong in something, say problem-solving capacity, but do they actually use that strength like a bull in a china shop with the decisions that they make? How does that even affect the people that they lead? So it's important to consider and bring a balanced approach, not just strength, to the capacities that we have to bring to bear. And so today we're actually going to be talking about a distillation of only a small number of these areas that are covered in the reporting capabilities. And what we're going to be looking at has been developed with industry to provide insights into resiliency assets. And that's what we'll go through next. But just a reminder, the common thread here in terms of this assessment is our judgment capacity and decision-making skills. So the resiliency assets inventory, which is what we're going through, is a distillation of particular capacities which are drawn from our most in-depth of reports, the Blue Diamond, which you've got an example of in front of you. We're looking to inform you through this report how these capacities influence a person's ability to maintain and or regain their bounce. The reality is that stresses come and go. We can always depend on change. The question, therefore, is how do we build resiliency within the leaders and the people that we work with? So the first part of the report identifies the capacities that we measure in terms of enhancers of an individual's judgment and resiliency. So I'm not going to go through all 8, as you can see in the image on the right. I just want to highlight and demystify a few. It's always helpful because it's life experience that actually teaches us the most, and therefore those that opted to get their own report will be able to gain more insights and understanding of the power of this tool. However, I'm happy to take this offline and discuss anything further with anyone who's interested in knowing more. So let's start with noticing. So noticing is an enhancer of good judgment because stronger scores actually indicate whether an individual can attend to an issue whilst it is still small. So before it becomes something major, this is the capacity to notice the beneath the surface subtleties that impact outcomes. If they're able to address it while it's still small, there's going to be less energy that's going to be used. Sensitivity and noticing of our own as well as others' levels of wellness is an important capability to have, addressing it before it gets out of hand. Problem solving. In terms of our capacity to make careful decisions, solve problems effectively, and find solutions. The reality is that when we see a weaker result, things aren't likely getting done. Problems aren't getting solved, and therefore an individual will likely become stretched and less capable. So the note here to consider is that when we've got these data and insights, it's about how do we want to then help support those individuals. And problem solving can be developed. In fact, with good mentorship and support, an individual's problem solving ability will enhance. And what about someone's capacity to focus in the midst of distractions and breaks in concentration? Imagine gaining some of these objective data insights on an individual's ability to focus on the goals that they have, particularly when in times of stress and strain. It's our capacity to concentrate on tasks and or projects that's going to increase our resiliency. Why? Because it will help us reduce the clutter. We also need to understand what's important. So the capacity for sensing what's important, most necessary, and vital to do. It's our capacity to discern what's the immediate attention and put our energy into what matters most. How we expend our energy in critical situations when effective in doing so means that we spend energy in smart ways rather than chasing less important tasks. I love this quote, and it really helps summarize and makes simple the concept of the fact that these enhancers all point to what can be most simply defined and captured by the fact that we build resiliency by managing our energy. And as a result, our decision-making capabilities will improve. And the individual whom I'm referencing on this slide, Dr. Kian Vu, is actually a key resource that I'd recommend for anyone who's interested in understanding the neuroscience of how we can rewire our brains. Just as important to understand what enhances our resiliency is also what we know draws our energy and is therefore likely to be an inhibitor of good judgment. I think most people won't be surprised at stress. But the wonderful thing about this assessment and reporting tool is that there are multiple measures in terms of stresses. So the reason that stress is so important and why we measure it in 4 different ways is because it acts like a magnet. It will draw everything else down with it. Think about it in terms of our resiliency by contemplating stretching a rubber band. When you add more and more pressure, it will eventually snap. And the role of self-care. in terms of inhibiting our resiliency. Without adequate self-regard, we don't fill our own cup. There's just the basics, really, of health in terms of sleep, eat, exercise. But when stress is added and there is a lack of self-care, this will prevent reserves being able to be drawn from for individuals. And then you've got frustration factors. When an individual has strengths of their own, and this is where I mentioned before about that concept of balance, they can actually cause an individual to become frustrated with others when those others aren't sharing the strengths that they have. Or it can also be an indicator that the individual is going to be frustrated that their own strengths aren't being utilised. And clutter. This is the capacity to evaluate and reduce clutter in our external environment as well as internal. Mental and physical clutter creates an inability to focus our attention. So we want to be able to create a space to enable us to observe, synthesize, and therefore derive a careful evaluation, or in other words, have good judgment. Now, we've all heard about above the line and below the line behaviours, yes? But did you realise that those behaviours are more deeply rooted and harder to change than you think? And that's actually because of top-down and bottom-up thinking. So if we talk for a moment about the neuroscience and harking back to what we've just gone through in terms of inhibitors, our brain is highly programmable, but it is also highly programmed. This top-down, bottom-up thinking, the top-down aspect is really this conscious part of our brain, whereas the bottom is like our supercomputer. It functions on auto mode. So if that supercomputer is currently programmed with underlying ways that we react to situations, how can we actually more consciously choose the above the line behaviours? So it's important for us to understand that although we may want something, a new behaviour, a new way of thinking that is above the line, our supercomputer may still currently be programmed for a different need and therefore an emotional or behavioural response. So think of an example of somebody heading towards burnout already. They may want a way out that's actually driven by goals and a process. Yet, what they're more likely to need is learning how to rest, listening to their body. They're the type of individuals that are likely to be thinking health is mind over matter. I just need to push through. The reality is that we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. I love this quote. It just really, again, helps remind us that we need more data and insights to create self-awareness so we can choose change. One of the tips that I wanted to share with you about retraining and rewiring your brain is an acronym called RAIN. And that's R, to recognize what is happening. So in this example where I mentioned this individual's thinking health is mind over matter, recognizing that that's the thought loop, but then allowing the experience to be there just as it is. So really using mindfulness and embodiment to allow the experience to be there. Then I investigate with interest and care. So this is seeking to listen to our bodies. This individual who's more of a likely to push through is therefore, if they were to investigate with interest and care, they may realise that they are actually physically tired, or they may notice a thought loop. I should do this, I should do that, shoulding all over themselves, as we put it. And then N is to nurture with self-compassion. And that might be, therefore, an opportunity for that individual to reframe those thought loops. Can I ask for help? Or, you know what, I'll rest today. I am tired, and that's okay. So finally, though, the report also measures leadership qualities and our underlying strength of self, both of which are important to resiliency and decision making, because self is about who we are. And the stronger this base, the more we can draw from it and hold ourselves firm with anchor points when challenges and change are happening. And what we know through the research is that when these leadership qualities are balanced, an individual will convey a sense of trustworthiness, dependability, confidence, and therefore leadership within their work environment, what we do. So we've gone through the resiliency assets report and some strategies, but knowledge without action is the difference between a dream and a goal. So what current measures do you have in place to understand the resiliency of the people in your organisation? How are you advocating and building resiliency? I've got multiple references that I can also send out to you in terms of the Mental Health Commission, amongst other individuals like Dr. Ken View, that I can share with you should you have any further interest in and around additional research and resources that can help build your strategy and your intentions around supporting the people in your employ. So answering those questions, if you're ready to answer those questions, certainly the Judgment Index can help by providing a baseline with objective data insights. As I mentioned before, it is not a self-reporting tool. It can also help with the regards to the implementation of coaching and development programs. And in assisting to use the data insights for further strategy planning and improvement overall to employee wellbeing and therefore performance. So thank you for your time. And at this point, I'm actually going to answer any questions and maybe even go back over some of the information that I shared in terms of the Resiliency Assets report. Because like I said, I didn't go through every single aspect. However, I did want to just touch on some of the key aspects that come through, because the ability for individuals to have a lived experience really does add context and create an easier pathway for people to really understand the use of the data and the insights. And if you do actually have any more individual scenarios, questions, or would actually even like to have a trial of understanding what the Judgment Index can provide in terms of the different reporting, then please don't hesitate to reach out.